Hallo internet. Goeiedag, good evening, goeiemôre, waar ooit julle mag wees. I'm honored today to have a very special guest with me. I've known of this person for a very, very long time. South African Air Force pilot, he flew those fucking noisy things, those things that screeched across the sky. He flew one of those things, or he flew a lot of them, but he could only fly one at a time. Any case, why and how do I know this gentleman? And why am I honored to speak with him? Well, I have a book of which he was a co-author, The South African Air Force at War. It's a big tome of a book out of print. Sorry, I went and looked to see it's out of print and it's also not available anywhere. So I'm a very fortunate person. I own a copy. Anyway, who may you ask am I speaking with? Lieutenant Colonel Martin Louw, when he left the SAAF. He went on a very, very, very successful, illustrious aviation career, civilian street. He can tell us all about that. He still flies. Yes, and he can tell us all about that too. So I'm going to pipe up now, but not before saying I do thank you very, very much, sir. I do appreciate that you've come and spent your time to educate us a little bit, to entertain us, and to tell us about your career in the SAF and then after at ComAir, and all the other interesting things that you do and the flying that you still do. You mentioned something special to me, but I'll shut up about that, and you can share that with us towards the end, specifically about the longevity of this career. So here we are. Martin Louw, an aviator of note, I say thank you so much for chatting with Legacy Conversations on this occasion.
Thanks, Vossie. Thanks for the opportunity. It's absolute pleasure to speak to you this evening and tell you a bit of my 50-year history now this year, flying continuously for the last 50 years. I started, or should I start, I was born in Bloemfontein in South Africa in 1955. My father worked for Shell, the oil company, which was to my great advantage because his big contracts every year were the South African Airways, SAAF itself, and also South African Railways. And he specialized in all the lubricants for these entities. And because of the Airways and the Air Force connection, he always brought flying magazines home. And that obviously started my interest in flying. Then also my dad was crazy about air shows. He took us to all the air shows. And the one that I remember most was an air show at Baragwanath. Must have been around about 1963 or something like that, where I saw Air Force, South African Air Force 9-ship Sabre formation aerobatic team perform. And after that, I was sold. I said to my dad, I'm not interested in doing anything else. That is what I want to go and do. So I matriculated in 1972 at the Altmekaar High School in Johannesburg. My dad wanted me to go and study engineering, the same that he did. I wasn't interested. I said, I want to go and fly. I want to go straight to the Air Force. And we came to an agreement that I could go straight to the Air Force, but that I would study a degree through the Air Force in time. So that was the agreement. I was 17 years old when I joined the Air Force. Started off at the Air Force gym initially for basic training. Went through all the selection processes to become a pilot. Was successful. I think we started about 3,000 candidates. In the end, we were 77 that set off for Donata in March that year. Did about 6 weeks worth of ground school and then started flying exactly one day after my 18th birthday on the 14th of May 1973. And then I went solo on Harvard for the first time on the 4th of July 1973. And that was before I had a car license. So I could fly Harvards. I was allowed to fly Harvards, but I couldn't drive a car. at that stage. Anyway, we completed about just over 100 hours on the Harvards. And a funny situation occurred at that stage. The Air Force decided in its wisdom that we would do officers course slap bang in the middle of our flying training. So we completed our Harvard training at Donata first. And then we went off to the military academy to do our officers course. And that was together with the Army guys and also Navy guys, which was quite a culture shock for us because we were now used to Air Force ways. And then to be combined with, especially the Army guys, the Navy was pretty much the same as the Air Force, but the Army guys were a different species, totally. Fortunately for us, we were very fit because on PUPS course, pilot's course in the Air Force, you run everywhere. You're not allowed to walk. And every week they made us run around the airfield a few times. And then once a month we had to run around all the way to Nigel's drive-in and back as well. So we were very fit. In actual fact, we reckon we were fitter than the parabats that joined us on the officers course. So that was very helpful to us. So then we did the officers course, which was very interesting. I must say in the end, I'm quite happy that it happened this way, that we didn't do officers course in the Air Force itself, because it really gave us a wider scope of what was actually going on in the Defence Force. And I made a lot of Army friends there as well, and Navy, of course, as well. That lasted 6 months, and then we set off to Longabon for the final phase of our flying training, which was on Impalas. But at that stage as well, we were selected, or we could volunteer. Those of us wanted to go to the military academy to go and study further. And we were selected, and a group of us, we were about 14 Air Force pilots in the group there that decided to go and study at the military academy. And we were told that this phase would actually start immediately after we received our wings. So we were put in a separate group flight on our pilot's course, and we were actually rushed through the Impala phase because we had to start at the military academy in September, where the other guys only finished by the end of November. Very, very interesting times at Longabon. Fantastic base, fantastic instructors. Everything worked nicely there. Flying the Impala was great. It was a light jet, but a lot faster than the Harvard, a lot more modern than the Harvard, of course. But we finished that then in 6 months. In actual fact, we had to go off to Bloemfontein to finish our flying just before wings because the weather was too bad in Longabon to finish us in time. That's just our group that went off to the military academy. Then we set off to the military academy in September, and I studied a BMIL degree there, which was a combination of BCom, BSc, and BA subjects. And we actually finished the degree in 2 years. So we had Sunday between first and second years. There were no holidays whatsoever. We finished the degree in 2 years. Obviously, the military academy was affiliated to Stellenbosch University. So we had a great time socializing with Stellenbosch University as well. And then we also, again, we were all together, Army, Navy, and Air Force, which was quite interesting. The Army guys were obviously by far in the majority, but we had a great time and lots of fun giving our views of how things should be done at basically an Army-run base at that stage. But that's a story for another time. We can elaborate a bit on that later. At the same time, that was then December of that year, which was now, what, 74. We got our wings. Wings parade was quite big. We were, I think, about 45 pilots that got our wings on that day. So one of the biggest groups ever. And a very, very proud day, of course, because that was the day that General Bob Rogers, ex-CIA Second World War fighter pilot, also Korean War fighter pilot, and then the leader of the Buccaneer Squadron when they went and fetched the Buccaneers in the UK. He presented me with my wings. Very, very proud that day. Unfortunately for us, because we were still at the military academy to go and study, we stayed CAWAs or candidate officers and weren't promoted to second lieutenants like the rest of the guys. So that was a bit of a letdown for us. But after about another 6 months or a year, we were promoted to second lieutenants while we were at the military academy as well. So yeah, lots of interesting stories at the military academy that will take the whole night to talk about, but also made a lot of friends there, army friends, which I'm obviously met through the years going on in my career in the Air Force and later on. And great guys. Overall, we had a fantastic time, fantastic spirit, and it was really a great time. When I finished the military academy, that was in 76, September 76, we finished. Did our passing out parade, which was quite an eventful evening as well. When after the mess formal party, we had to take our parents and girlfriends and so on back to the hotel, and two of my Air Force friends decided to race back to the academy, and the one guy rolled his car onto the parade ground, and before we could have our passing out parade the next morning, they had to pull the car off the parade ground first before we could march on, which was but there were lots of other stories like that, so that I won't go into depth now. Anyway, then I went back to the Air Force and started flying again. I was posted to 4 Squadron on Impalas. We were based at Air Force Base Waterkloof in Pretoria initially. Fantastic commanding officer there, Major Piet Roos, absolute gentleman, and he was instrumental in bringing us back to flying the Impala in a very short space of time. I also then converted onto the Impala Mark II, which is the single-seat Impala, which was used profusely in the Bush War. I never flew it in the Bush War. I was already on Mirages by the time the war started. But fantastic little fighter aircraft, and really made its name in the Bush War. But I got my conversion onto the Impala Mark II as well. And then all the fighter courses started. All these courses were done at Air Force Base Petersburg, or Polokwane as it's known now. First of all, Impala Operational Training Course, where you learn to do weapons with Impalas and tactical navigations and tactical formation flying, that type of thing, for 6 months. And then I was selected to go on to Sabre conversion immediately, having done quite well on the Impala operational training course. But unfortunately, we just completed the ground school and the simulator phase of the Sabre course, and then the Sabres were grounded. So we could not fly them, which was a very great pity for me personally, because I've always wanted to fly the Sabre. And thinking back to 1963, when I saw those formations of Sabre aerobatics, I really wanted to fly that machine, but it wasn't to be. We went back to our squadrons then and continued flying at 4 Squadron. At that stage, 4 Squadron moved from Air Force Base Waterkloof to Lanseria. So we opened the base there at Lanseria with Impalas, and then the boss was Major Stein Venter. Also quite a character, a great boss, but he didn't take nonsense from anybody, and somebody to stay out of his way if he was in a foul mood. But also a great time there. And what happened to me there was actually a very good phase in my life, in that Major Stein Venter had to go on staff course. So for quite a few months, I had to run the squadron as a full lieutenant. I was a full lieutenant at that stage. And there I was, you know, only in the Air Force for, what was it, 3 years, going on 4 years after pilot's course. And I was put in charge of a Impala squadron, primarily Impala Mark IIs. And I found myself having to command anything from senior warrant officers who'd been in the Air Force for many, many years, national servicemen, fellow lieutenant permanent force pilots, but also citizen force pilots, mostly SAA, so South African Airways pilots, captains that were citizen force pilots at the squadron at the time. So that was really a excellent training school for me in management and command, and I learned a lot by being thrown into the deep end there at Force Squadron. Anyway, a while later, they then replaced the Sabre course, which was the lead-in course to Mirages, with what they called a Flight Leaders course, which was also done on Impala Mark IIs. But this taught you really how to be a leader of a formation in operational times. A lot of weapons, tactical navigation, reconnaissance missions, that type of thing, but leading the formations, which was very valuable going forward as well. So that course lasted about 4, maybe 5 months on Impalas. Then we went back to the squadron again to now apply what you learned at Flight Leaders course at the squadron. And then I was fortunate enough, I think I only spent another 6 months at Force Squadron on Impalas, and I was selected to go on to Mirage course in January 1979. So back to Petersburg again, because the Mirage conversion was done at Petersburg on Mirage 3s. And there we flew the Mirage 3 DZ, D2Z, and Mirage 3 EZ single-seater. The DZ and the D2Z were 2-seaters. So did my Mirage conversion there. That was heavy. That was difficult. Probably the most difficult course that I've ever done in my life. You spent about 25 hours flying the Mirage, just getting to know the aircraft, and then it was straight into weapons with the speed difference of at least 200 to 250 knots between the Impala and the Mirage. That was serious stuff. It was very difficult. I also lost a friend on Mirage course. We unfortunately pulled out too late on a rocket attack and flew into the ground. So it was really a tough time. At this time as well, in beginning of 1979, the Bush War, as far as the other aircraft, not just the choppers, but the other aircraft started hotting up as well. We had Kasinga in I think it was, 78, where the Buccaneers, Canberras, and Mirage 3s were involved. But by the beginning of 1979, really, everybody started getting involved in the Bush War, that as far as the fighter aircraft is concerned. And then I lost another friend, Vali Mare, who was with me on a pilot's course. He got shot down in a Canberra in the bush. And then another friend of mine, very good friend of mine, Duncan, got killed in a Buccaneer accident. So, and then also another, it wasn't really a friend, but somebody that I knew quite well, Chris Pritz, was killed in the Mirage F1. So in the first 6 months of 1979, I actually lost 4 friends through accidents or war situations, which was a bit disconcerting, but obviously you were young, resilient. We worked through it, had good bosses, good commanders, good instructors, and we worked our way through that. And then by July 1979, I'd completed Mirage course at Petersburg on Mirage 3s, and I was posted to 3 Squadron on Mirage F1s. Now, this may be a little bit of a story. I actually wanted to go to Buccaneers because I had friends on the Buccaneer Squadron, but my air-to-ground results were not so good. My air-to-air results were were very good. So my air-to-air firing and air combat maneuvering results were good. So they said to me, no, you're a pure fighter pilot. You have to go to 3 Squadron, which was basically pure fighters. Would have loved to fly the Buccaneer, but very, very glad that I ended up at 3 Squadron. It was one of the most professionally run squadrons, I believe, in the Air Force at the time. And excellent commanding officers, and I learned basically everything, or apart from the little bit that I learned before that, but everything that I learned at 3 Squadron stood me in very good stead for the rest of my flying career, not just in the Air Force, but also in civilian life after that as well. So the good bosses that I had there was, first of all, Fred de Tooy, and then after him, Jack Groenling. Now, Jack Groenling was a different type of commanding officer. He made us work. There was no sitting around in the crew rooms and having bullshit stories or whatever to chat about. He made us work, but we learned a lot from him, and he really operationally improved the squadron to a tremendous degree, and we can be very thankful for him for that. Quite a few stories that came out of that time, but Jack Groenling was also the type of guy who told the general straight what he thought and what was wrong, not always as how good the squadron was or how good the Air Force was, but actually what was wrong with the Air Force as well, because we were heading towards operations at that time. So my operational experience actually started on the ground, which was a bit of a funny way to do it. But in those days, they used us, the Air Force pilots or fighter pilots and others, to do ops tours in the bush as well. So my first ops tour was actually a ground tour where I was assigned to Oshikati to go and run the ops room there for 2 months. And took a Flossie C-130 to Grootfontein, got out there, and then was told that I'm going to fly in the back of a kudu at night to Ondangwa, and then I'd catch a Gary from Ondangwa to Oshikati. Now, I think that was probably the most fearful exercise of my whole operational career, is flying in the back of a kudu at night between Grootfontein and Ondangwa, because that was the time when the kudus were throwing their blades as well, and you'd end up in the Shona somewhere or whatever. But fortunately, I made it and got to Ondangwa, and then on to Oshikati, where Ollie Holmes was my boss there, my Air Force boss. That was actually a very, very interesting time, the 2 months there, because we were preparing for a major operation. And I met, obviously, a lot of senior generals there, including General Jannie Geldnys, which was just a magnificent person. He walked into the ops room one day, and a little bit different to what you normally expect from the army, who introduced themselves by rank and surname. He introduced himself to me as Jannie Geldnys, and I introduced myself as Martin Louw, and I met up with him in the middle of the Angolan bush about 2 or 3 months later, and he said to me, "Hello, Martin, how are you?" You know, that was the type of person that he was. Fantastic guy. And so for the first month, I spent running the ops room at Oshikati. Saw a lot of chopper operations. So I really got to know helicopter operations in detail, how to organize them, how to control them, what the chopper guys were really like. Very different from the fighter guys in many respects, but excellent operators. You could always count on the chopper guys to do whatever you required them to do. So that was quite good. But also saw a lot of casualties being brought in from our side and from the other side. A lot of the SWAPO, as we call them, terrorists, guerrillas, whatever you want to call them at that time, also being dumped at Oshakati after being killed by our forces. So that was really an eye-opener that this war wasn't, you know, what you read in books or comics. It was real, and our own people also got injured. What was actually quite funny there, in the ops room, we were adjacent to the army ops room, and the army ops room had a graph there of war activity versus casualties. And funny thing is, as the war activities increased, the casualties on the army side actually decreased, because the army guys got bored in camp and started doing funny things with rifles and phosphorus grenades and on the rugby field and so on. So the hospital was always full when there wasn't any operations going on, and then empty when the operations were actually being conducted. Quite a funny graph. Anyway, then a big operation started. Can't remember. Sorry, I didn't make any notes, but I can't remember what the operation was. I think it was Smoke Shell or something like that. 1980. The major operation, yeah, Smoke Shell. And we then moved the whole ops room, Army and Air Force, over to Ondangwa, and we operated the ops room out of the hangar there. And there, I think I worked the hardest in my whole life. I went to bed at about 4 o'clock in the morning and had to get up at about 5 o'clock again to conduct all the operations, make sure that everything is in place. And was terrible for me as well, because my squadron was there at Ondangwa at the time, and my companions or my fellow pilots at 3 Squadron were all flying operations, and I was sitting on the ground in the ops room. But I was soon to get my opportunity as well. Then we had the one operation, Smoke Shell, where we had a 16 ship of F1s, and I think 4 Buccaneers went to bomb Lubango. And then they got the last formation of 4 Mirage F1s got hit by SAM-3s and SAM-2s, and 2 aircraft got damaged. The one IC Dupe landed at Ruacana, and the other one, Franz Pretorius, actually did a dead stick landing at Ondangwa with the F1. So he ran out of fuel because he was full of holes, so the fuel streamed out. Ran out of fuel about 30 miles from Ondangwa and actually glided the Mirage F1 in at Ondangwa. I was standing outside watching this happen, which was quite spectacular. Especially to see all these aircraft, the 16 Mirages, all coming in back at the same time, all wanting to land, and then still having this emergency in between. It was quite spectacular, but fortunately everybody landed safely, so it was fine. Right, then after my 2-month tour, I went back to the squadron, and then I started flying operationally in the bush as well. So how it worked with Mirage squadrons, the Impalas were based in the bush permanently. So there was a wing of Impalas based at Ondangwa and sometimes at Rundu, and then also at Mapacha at Katima Malilo. And they operated there from these bases permanently. So the Impala squadron pilots would go up and man these wings and then operate for a certain amount of time and then go home again to their squadrons. That did not happen with the Mirages, Buccaneers or Canberras. We were only deployed up to the bush when there were specific big operations going on. So we normally went to Grootfontein initially, but we were also deployed forward to Ondangwa many times with the Mirages, whereas the Buccaneers and the Canberras normally operated from Grootfontein. So interesting times. I was this heavy fighter pilot wanting to shoot down MiGs, and used to pulling a lot of Gs in air combat maneuvering, which was our bread and butter. We did that all day and every day. Flew a lot on the Mirage F1, all out of Waterkloof, where my squadron was based. The other F1 squadron was later based at Hoedspruit, of course. And then the Mirage 3 squadron, 2 squadron was based at Hoedspruit as well. But we stayed at Waterkloof the whole time with 3 squadron. So I was this air fighter pilot, and then at last we were going to go on a operational mission, my first operational mission into Angola, and it was a bombing sortie, first of all, which wasn't our style at all. And then secondly, we formated on Canberra bombers, and we did our bombing straight and level. Now, we were used to doing bombing as well, but we used to do that in a dive attack and then a high G break off and back to low level again as quickly as possible to avoid anti-aircraft fire and the missiles and so on. But this was an attack on Kahama, on a radar base at Kahama, and we flew formation on a Canberra, and the Canberra opened its bomb doors and straight and level flying. And we were just told to be ready. And as we saw the first bomb leave the Canberra, we dropped our bombs as well. And the most G that I pulled on this sortie was the flying over the airfield over Grootfontein, coming back and breaking onto downwind for landing. So that wasn't really a fighter pilot's first operational sortie, but that was what it was. Anyway, so then we continue doing a lot of bombing sorties through Operation Protea, for instance. Some ground attack with cannon as well. And a lot of escort sorties as well, where we escorted especially the Canberras that were doing fighter reconnaissance sorties deep into Angola. So we would be used to escort them. And then also the Mirage 3 R2Zs. So reconnaissance Mirage 3s that flew normally in at extreme low levels. And we would escort a single Mirage 3 R2Z with 2 Mirage F1s, just to make sure that they don't get bounced by MiGs. So the majority of my operational flying on the Mirage F1 was actually bombing sorties. Lots of terrorist camps and bases, and also some other infrastructure targets when with Operation Protea especially, and then later on again in some of the other operations. Great experience. It was so amazing to be in that situation as a 22, 23-year-old person flying a Mirage deep into Angola, leading squadrons of Mirages in Angola at that young age, and flying this fantastic machine. It was actually quite an incredible experience, and very, very glad that I had the opportunity to experience that. The defenses from the enemy side versus Mirages were really not that up to scratch, although we did lose a few airplanes. The first one that we lost was a Mirage 3 reconnaissance aircraft that got shot down. Quite a few Impalas got shot down, obviously because they were a lot slower. They were more susceptible to man-pads, shoulder-launched air-to-air missiles, or ground-to-air missiles, sorry, and also anti-aircraft fire. So we lost quite a few Impalas, but Mirage is not really much damage. We had one hit by SAM-7 on the tail, but managed to return. We had some other with a bit of damage, but nothing serious. And I think the reason for this was twofold. They didn't have too fantastic anti-aircraft weaponry at that stage. Probably the most impressive was the ZSU 23-4, which was a 4-barreled 23mm radar-directed anti-aircraft system. But we made sure that we stayed high enough above it and fast enough through the target to not be affected. And then apart from that Operation Smoke Shell, where we got hit by the big SAMs, we never encountered the big SAMs again until Modulo Hooper year in 87, 88. So our tactics were sound, I think. We adapted our tactics to the target and the threat all the time. So that helped us a lot. And then also, as I mentioned, we were in and out of the target in minimum time, so very little time for the enemy actually to react. So yeah, we had quite a good record in the bush in the early 80s there, with very few incidents or losses. That was also the time that the MiGs then started getting involved. And initially, the MiGs would keep to their area or closer to their main bases, which was Lubongo and Manong, and didn't really come that far south. But we found that as things progressed, they started getting more and more aggressive and started moving further south. And then in 1981, I think it was, we were scrambled, or two of our squadron members, Johan Rankin and Johan du Plessis, were scrambled because two MiG-21s were coming down too far south for our liking. And they intercepted the two MiGs, and Johan Rankin shot down the one MiG with cannon. Now, I just want to mention something here because I think it's quite important. We had Matra 550 air-to-air missiles, short-range infrared missiles on the aircraft. Fired them, missed. These missiles were actually quite useless. And so he closed in for a 30mm cannon kill and shot down one of the MiG-21s there. Exactly a year later, in 1982, shot down the second MiG. At this time, they were escorting Canberras, and it was Johan Rankin again, just his luck, and Kobus Turin this time, and the MiGs were heading towards the Canberra, sent the Canberra home, and engaged the MiGs, and again Johan Rankin, after firing missiles which missed, shot down one MiG-21 with cannons. So he was lucky enough to shoot down two MiG-21s. Now, where was I in all of this? The way it works, I was the second pair to be scrambled to the MiGs. By the time that we got there, everything was over, and we could just go home, unfortunately. So both times for it happened that way. So myself and my wingman, John Ings, we got scrambled as well, got there as the second pair, and just went home. But fortunately, on the 13th of May 1982, on my birthday, John Ings and myself got scrambled because they'd intercepted a message that a helicopter with Cubans was going to a little town called, now I've forgotten the town's name. It's north of Ongiva. You remember it just now. That the chopper had landed there with Cubans that were coming to have a chat with the local brigade there. And so we were scrambled to see if we can't find this helicopter and shoot it up. And we circled this town for probably about 20 minutes. It started quite high because possibility of anti-aircraft, and we couldn't find it because looking for it all over the town. And we started going lower and lower and lower and lower, trying to find this helicopter, getting quite frustrated. Then fortunately, my wingman, John Ing, saw the helicopter. It wasn't parked in town where we expected it. It was parked south of town, about probably about 4 kilometers out of town in the bushes there. So he picked it up, and because he saw it first, he rolled in first, fired his cannon at it and missed, fortunately for me. So I rolled in and shot the Mi-17 up with 30mm cannon there. And so that was quite a nice birthday present on the 13th of May, 1982. We continue with this type of operation. We'll spend all night if I have to recall everything that happened there. But then my last operation on this tour on Mirage F1s was quite interesting. There was a place called Kangamba in the central eastern part of Angola. And this was about, I think, September, October 83. And UNITA was attacking this. There was a airfield at Kangamba, and UNITA was attacking this airfield, but they were having a tough time doing it. And they called for assistance from the South African forces. And I'm not sure if you've spoken to him, but there's a total Air Force legend called Mossie Basson. He was on the ground there with the UNITA forces. And he suggested then that we bring the Air Force in and bomb the living daylights out of this airfield to help UNITA. So the Air Force decided to take 4 Buccaneers with AS-30 missiles, air-to-ground missiles with quite large warheads, with penetration warheads, to take out the bunkers. And then there were Canberras throwing normal dumb bombs. And then the Mirage F1s from my squadron, the F1CZs, would do a combat patrol over this lot in case any MiGs decided to intervene. We were way outside our own radar coverage and inside Angola's radar coverage. So it was quite a dangerous thing to do. And they were going to spend quite a bit of time there shooting off because each Buccaneer had 2 AS-30 missiles to shoot. They could only shoot 1 at a time. So it was going to be quite a long time over there. Anyway, we took off early morning from Rundu, my squadron. The Buccaneers and Canberras took off from Grootfontein, and we flew all the way to Kangamba, which is about 300 kilometers inside Angola. Got to Kangamba, and we set up the combat air patrol over this lot, and I had the best weapons demonstration that I've ever seen in my life, with these Buccaneers rolling in and shooting off these AS-30 missiles at the bunkers, and then the Canberras came over and did their bombing with the dumb bombs. It was a great show to watch from the perch there above. And yeah, shot the living daylights out of the place, and UNITA took over the airport. We then, this was a Sunday morning, very early, so we took off at first light for Kangamba. So we probably landed back, but we landed back at Mapacha, Katimo, Malilo, probably about 10 o'clock in the morning. And then we just refueled, and now we had to go back home. But we weren't allowed to fly back home to Waterkloof in Pretoria, which was our home base, because then everybody would know that we were in the bush again if we arrived there on a Sunday morning, because we don't normally fly on a Sunday. So they sent us off to Hoedspruit. Now, the mad thing about this whole setup was that at first light in the morning, we were bombing the daylights out of 300 kilometers inside Angola. By 11 o'clock that morning, we were playing golf at Hoedspruit. So that's the life of a fighter pilot. We didn't have to grovel in the bushes like the poor army guys and the chopper guys and whatever. So that was fantastic. Anyway, then my first tour on Mirages came to an end. I was flight commander at that time at 3 Squadron on Mirage F1s, and I was sent to instructor's course. Now, this was done at Donato. So off I went back to Donato and back to Harvard's, which initially I felt, oh, please, we don't want to go and fly this old aeroplane again. But it was actually a great deal of fun. And from that day onwards, my love affair with Harvard's continued till today. I still fly Harvard's today. So that was quite fantastic. We did instructor's course for 6 months, learned to fly the Harvard again, learned to give instruction on the Harvard, and Donato itself was an extremely fun base to be at. The parties at Donato were quite incredible. They were nearly as good as the parties that we had at Petersburg on all the fighter courses, but the Petersburg parties were more organized parties, where the Donato parties were always impromptu parties, but fantastic times that we had there. And also mixing with all the pilots from the other departments in the Air Force, the chopper guys and the transport guys and the maritime guys, and everybody thrown together, instructing again, teaching new people to fly. That was quite a good experience. Didn't spend too much time there. Just about 9 months. 6 months instructor's course, and then 3 months just to get my first 2 students solo. And then I was sent off to Longabon to go and give instruction on Impalas. So spent 3 years at Longabon. Started off as a normal line instructor on Impalas, then was made flight commander, and then made chief flying instructor on Impalas. And fortunately, towards the end, I got to fly for the Silver Falcons as well. Not very long, but got that experience as well. Fortunate enough to do low-level aerobatic shows with the Mark 1 Impala and also the Silver Falcons. Oh, here's something that I forgot to mention. I was fortunate enough in my first tour on Mirage F1s to give quite a few low-level aerobatic shows in the Mirage F1 as well. Started off with a show in Kimberley, and then quite a few shows through the years, through the 4 years that I spent at the squadron. So that was another highlight. Hard work, lots of practice, but really very, very satisfying to give a good show in a machine like a Mirage F1 to tens of thousands of people. That's great experience. Anyway, so I continued on Impalas, giving shows with the Silver Falcons and also solo shows with the Impala Mark 1. And here again, a fantastic time. We had a very, very good base with very good officer commandings. Longabon was actually one of the more modern bases at the time, so it was a pleasure to live there. You had a fantastic time. You would go over weekends when we weren't working, you would go crayfish diving in the morning and then go water skiing on the Berg River during the day, and then quickly rush off to Cape Town for a pizza and a movie in the evening or something like that. It was quite a brilliant time. One of the best bases that I've ever lived at. And again, made lots of good friends, had fantastic times, fantastic parties, and really enjoyed my 3 years at Longabon. Lots of the students that went through Longabon as well, obviously met up with them, flew with them later on in the Air Force and in civilian life, and even, funnily enough, met some of them now this month at Oshkosh. I've just returned from Oshkosh in the United States, the big air show. Met some of them that I hadn't seen since those days there at Oshkosh. So fantastic times. Okay, then after Longabon, I went back to 3 Squadron. Very happy to be back at 3 Squadron. A little bit late though for my liking, because Modular and Hooper, Ops Modular and Hooper were full on the go at the time. That was what, 1987, 88, and would have liked to have been part of that more intensely, but unfortunately not. I arrived there basically, or just qualified operationally back on the Mirage F1 just as the war officially or unofficially ended. But we still deployed a lot to Ondangwa and Grootfontein after that. Did a lot of exercises while all the peace negotiations and whatever was going on. Did a lot of development in new tactics to counter the MiG-23, which had obviously arrived in Angola and was a serious threat to us, especially with the Russian missiles that they had on their aircraft now being much better than the missiles we had. At this stage, we had V3Bs, which was the indigenous missile, plus Micro 550s, but they were quite useless. MiG-23s basically just laughed at us, just flew away from us every time. We had decent missiles in those days, short-range air-to-air missiles. I believe we could have had at least 5 MiG kills if we had decent missiles. Wasn't to be, and we had to adapt quickly. Fortunately for me, in my position at 3 Squadron at this stage, I was basically the operations officer, which is the second in command of the squadron. And I started getting involved in airborne weapons projects, especially air-to-air missile projects. So we decided that the local development of our own air-to-air missiles was too slow, and we purchased missiles from Israel, the Python 3, which we called the Snake, and integrated that onto the F1. So at last now we had a decent missile, but unfortunately for us, the war had ended, so we couldn't use them operationally, but I was fortunate enough to be the project officer on this missile, so I got to fire the first missile at the tow target in South Africa as well. And then I was also involved in development of other smart weapons and high-speed reconnaissance drones at this stage, but this is a complete story on its own. But what this did for me, although I got posted after about another 2.5 years at 3 Squadron, I got posted to Air Force headquarters to run all these projects from the operational desk point of view, not specifically for projects, but on the operational evaluation side of these projects. What it did for me, although I was unhappy leaving the squadron, I could still fly part-time at the squadron, but it opened other doors for me. And the biggest door that it opened to me is we decided that we were friends with the Russians at this stage, funnily enough, after just, what was it, 18 months after the war stopped, where we bombed the Russians, and we were suddenly the biggest friends with the Russians. And we had this project going where we were putting MiG-29 engines into the F1s and the Cheetahs, as they were called, the converted Mirage 3s at this stage, to improve the performance, because the MiG-29's engine had a lot more thrust than the Mirage F1 engines and the Cheetah engines. And at the same time, we got the opportunity to evaluate the latest short-range air-to-air missile from Russia. They call it the R-73, we called it the AA-11. And I was fortunate enough to be identified by another legend, Colonel Casey Lewis, who was running all the missile projects in the Air Force, to go across to Russia, fly a MiG-29, and shoot down 2 MiG-21 drones with these missiles. So I had to study the MiG-29 books, because I was going to fly the aircraft. It's quite difficult because most of it was in Russian. Went across to Russia, spent about a week in Moscow, doing all the liaison work with the Air Force headquarters in Moscow before the actual flying started. And we lived on a dasha just outside Moscow on the Moscow River, where all the previous Communist Party or hoi polloi used to stay, which was quite impressive. And just a little story anecdote in between. My driver, who drove me out to the dasha, once we passed a big park in the middle of Moscow, and there were skydivers jumping out of a AN-2, Antonov 2 biplane. And he said to me, he actually also does skydiving there. Do I mind if we go across there quickly? I said, no, well, let's go and have a look. We arrived there. His friends invited him to come for a jump. And I was invited by a young girl who was the pilot of this Antonov 2 to fly the Antonov 2 over Moscow. So there I was flying an Antonov 2 over Moscow about 18 months after we were at war with the Russians. Quite an experience. Anyway, so we finished the contracting, and then I got put on a Russian passenger jet and flown down to a place called Aktubinsk, which is on the Volga River, close to the Caspian Sea. And this is, it still is the main operational evaluation base of the Russian Air Force. So it was a test flight center, but for operational testing. And that was basically the work that I was doing, also operational testing of systems. And at this base was all the aircraft that you could find in the Russian Air Force were actually based here. It was quite an incredible site. They were all parked on the hard stand. Anything from a MiG-17, MiG-21 to the biggest Tupolev bombers, and everything was on that base. Magnificent. And then I was put into the MiG-29, and dual-seater MiG-29. We took off and then flew a circle, and then as we came over the base again, they launched the MiG-21 drone from the ground, and we formated on the MiG-21 drone, flew out to the range, and then did the setup for the missile firing. And I fired the first AA-11 missile at extreme angles. This AA-11 missile was the first short-range air-to-air missile that had thrust vectoring and aerodynamic control. So it was extremely maneuverable. And the lock-on ranges of this missile's seeker, the infrared seeker, was about double of our V3C at that time as well, our own missile. Fantastic missile. So I shot the first missile, made a 90-degree turn right in front of my aircraft, and hit the MiG-21 drone side-on. Had a depleted uranium warhead as well. That MiG-21 was in 3 pieces down to the ground. Then for the rest of the sortie, I could evaluate the MiG-29, which was an absolute fantastic aircraft at that stage. Could do all the aerobatic maneuvers of inside the dimensions that an Impala Mark 1 does it, with about twice the acceleration of an F1. It was quite incredible. Then the next day fired the second missile, the same story again, but with just a different setup. I can't go into much detail, it'll take too long. But shot down the second MiG-21 with this AA-11. So I've got 2 MiG-21 drone kills. Not that they count much, but anyway. And then also got to evaluate the MiG-29 after the firing. And then the next day, as I was climbing, or we already climbed into the aircraft for just an aircraft evaluation sortie, when a big black limo arrived next to our aircraft. And then the guy who flew with me up to that time, oh yes, I must just mention, we couldn't understand each other because he was Russian and I could speak English and Afrikaans, but nothing else. So we found a little bit of German that we had common. So we related to each other in the cockpit in German, but with a bit of hand signals and whatever, we could make each other understandable. Anyway, so this black limousine pitches up, and out climbs the officer commanding of the base, who is also a test pilot, and he shows the other Russian pilot get out, and he jumped in and he went off on the sortie with me. So I think that was probably an evaluation of my capabilities rather than anything else. And he allowed me to do anything with this MiG-29 that I wanted to do. So it was quite fantastic. Unfortunately for that, when I finished flying the MiG-29 there at Aktubinsk, they said it's tradition in Russia that you have a party with them. And then I started... well, I knew what was coming. So first we had a fish fry there on the Volga River. And it was a tumbler full of vodka and Nastarovia, and you down it. And then you talk rubbish for about 20 minutes, and then it's another one, and you down it. And you talk even more rubbish for 20 minutes, because now it's starting to take effect. So we carried on for the whole afternoon, and we stumbled off home. But then I had to go to a big formal dinner with a officer commanding of the base. And you know the way it goes with the Russians as well. Then you have to toast everybody around the table just about, and it's down, down, down again. And then suddenly I woke up the next morning. So I'm very embarrassed to say that I passed out. But fortunately, the guy that flew with me also passed out. They told me afterwards. But quite a fantastic, amazing experience to be with these guys. And they are normal guys just like you and I. Complain about the same things, just want to talk about flying and aeroplanes, just want to compare notes. Fantastic guys. I really had an excellent time with the Russians. Then we bought 18 of these missiles, brought them back to South Africa and integrated them on the Mirage F1. And in Russia as well, I met the chief missile designer in Russia, Dr. Sokolovsky. He came out to South Africa as well. We took him hunting. We had great times with him. And we finished integrating the engine on the F1 and the missiles on the F1. And then we started edging towards 1994, where everything was basically stopped. And that was really the end of that. But I was then also, we fired the AA-11 from the F1. We went to a airborne weapons conference in the UK where all the NATO countries were, and it's the first time that they invited the Russians to come as well, because this was now after the Berlin Wall had fallen. And they invited this Dr. Sokolovsky to come and give a talk there at the conference. And he gave a long, very interesting speech on missile design and the future of air-to-air missiles. And question and answer session afterwards. And one of the Royal Air Force guys stood up and he said, "Doctor, is it possible to integrate Russian missiles on Western aircraft?" And he frowned and he looked at them and he said, "Go and ask the South Africans here. They've already done it." So we were the first Western Air Force to integrate Russian missiles on Western aircraft. And that was my project as well. So in these years, towards the end, I did a lot of operational testing down at TFTC, at Overberg as well. So I got involved with not the basic test flying, but the operational side of the test flying of all these systems. And we also started developing the helmet sight at that stage. So towards the end of, in the middle of 1994, I decided that the way things were going with the new government coming into place, and I was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force at that stage, there wasn't really a future. I saw that things were going to become a lot smaller and opportunities for further growth in the Air Force was limited. So I decided to join the armaments industry because I'd been doing some international marketing for them in countries like Chile and Pakistan and so on as well. And I joined Kentron, which was the air-to-air missile manufacturer at that stage. Later on, obviously, became Tenel. Still called Kentron in those days. And I did international marketing for them. Mostly in Pakistan, spent a lot of time in Pakistan, and then was fortunate enough also to give lectures at the Pakistan Air Force Fighter School in Sargodha, and on air-to-air missiles, and also got the opportunity to fly F-16 in Pakistan. You know, Pakistan had F-16s in those days, which was also quite brilliant. Pakistan Air Force, very, very capable. Sitting with old equipment in general, but their training and their standards and everything was really very high. Very impressed with them. Obviously, throughout my Air Force career as well, we had lots of contact with the Israelis. A lot of our systems were Israeli-based and developed with the help of the Israelis. We actually, in the early 80s, had an Israeli Phantom Squadron commander fly with us for 6 months on our squadron on Mirage F1s as well. He went with us to the bush during the war, and he just shook his head. He couldn't understand how we could operate such sophisticated aircraft under such conditions in the bush there in Ondangwa and Grootfontein. They were used to operating out of their home base all the time. But so yeah, the Israeli contact was very interesting as well. We learned a lot from them, but they weren't always as infallible as they made themselves out to be. Anyway, so spent about 18 months with Kentron doing international marketing, then also got the idea that, then went over to another company called IST, which was developing systems for the Air Force as well. But then also realized that the armaments industry was not really going to expand that much, and made the decision to rather go back to flying again. I was fortunate enough to still fly Mirage F1s as a reserve force pilot while I was at Kentron, but this had also now come to an end after 2 years. So I decided to leave and join Comair, which was up and coming airline in South Africa. Started off as a British Airways franchise, flying that brand, and then later we started Kulula, the low-cost brand as well at Comair. So started off as a 737 first officer, spent about 7 months flying a 737, then a command position came open on a Fokker F-27, which was an old turboprop, and lots of guys didn't want to go there, so I put my hand up and said I'll go, and was made a captain on the F-27, flew the F-27 for 4 months, and they got rid of the F-27s, they retired them, and I started flying Boeing 727s as a captain. So jumped the queue quite a lot, because airlines work on a seniority system, so I jumped the queue by going via the F-27, and then I started flying Boeing 727s, which was probably the most fantastic airliner to fly. It was still very much a pilot's aircraft, lots of hands-on flying, but it was fast. It was perfectly balanced, was just a beautiful aircraft to fly. Ask any airline pilot that has flown the Boeing 727, is probably his favorite aircraft that he ever flew. So fantastic aircraft. Became a training captain on 727s, and then fleet captain on 727s, and then got another job opportunity, went to speak to the bosses at Comair, asked them what my future was in Comair, and they made me the chief pilot at Comair. So after 5 years at Comair, so 96 to 2001, I was chief pilot for about 2 years. Middle of 2003, the then operations director at Comair, Peter Marks, unfortunately had a heart attack, and he decided to go on early retirement, and I got his job. So I was made the director flight operations. At first in charge of pilots and ops control of the airline, but in time they added cabin crew, all the airports, catering, what else? Just about everything. So about 3/4 of all the staff at Comair actually worked for me, and I was director of flight operations at Comair for 16 years, from 2003 basically through to 2019, and also served on the board of Comair for that time as well, for 16 years. Fantastic time, fantastic people. We grew the airline from a few 737s to a huge fleet of 25 737s. Also took delivery of brand new 737-800s out of the factory at Boeing. Was the first to flew the first aircraft out of Seattle, the first 800, and then also flew the first MAX 738 MAX out of Seattle. And it's a long, unfortunate story. The story of the MAX was totally unnecessary, according to me, but that's the way it was. We operated our MAX, first MAX, for 2 weeks before they were grounded, and we had another 2 waiting for us in Seattle to to be delivered when the Maxes were grounded. Anyway, then I retired from Comair. I'm not going to go into the detail of Comair at this stage. We can maybe do it in another talk. But I retired from Comair in March 2020, 2 weeks before COVID. So I was very fortunate that I reached the age of 65. Basically, that was the retirement age for pilots at Comair and my time. And I also felt that I'd had enough of the airline and working full time. And then since that time, I've been involved with a company called Incomar, which is a test flying company owned and run by Blokkies Joubert, which is one of the major test pilots in the South African Air Force, who started his own company. He was the chief test pilot on the Gripen project, for instance. And we do test flying for various customers, mostly overseas customers. In this company, we fly Boeing 737, we fly Cessna Caravan, Bosbok RV7, and a few other aircraft as well. So I still keep myself busy flying for Incomar on a part-time basis. I'm not fully employed by them. I'm a contract worker for them. And then going back all the years back to 94 when I left the Air Force, remember I said I continued to fly the F1 as a reserve force pilot. And I never cleared out of the Air Force. So effectively, I've been in the Air Force since 1973, which is now 50 years. Started flying after the F1 flying stopped, I started flying for the Air Force Museum again. And I'm still flying for the Air Force Museum. I fly the Harvard at the Air Force Museum. So my love affair with the Harvard is still continuing after 50 years. And I also have my own little RV8 aircraft that I base at Kitty Hawk outside Pretoria. So I fly that. I fly the Harvard, and then I fly Boeing 737, Cessna Caravan, and also RV for Incomar. So I'm still quite busy enough. It's just nice to be able to fly all these aircraft. Still to be able to fly after 50 years is really quite a honor and a pleasure. And last month, on the 4th of July, I celebrated the 50th anniversary of my first solo on the Harvard by flying the Harvard, a special Harvard 7111, which we call Nelson. I flew that Harvard at Swartkops on that day again, and I had quite a few friends and family join me on that day. It was very special. So really very blessed to be able to still fly after 50 years. I had a fantastic career in the Air Force. I joined the Air Force at exactly the right time when everything was booming in the Air Force. I joined Comair at exactly the right time when everything was booming in Comair. The opportunities were endless. Grabbed all the opportunities that I could, and still having a fantastic time flying these airplanes, and I'd like to continue for as long as possible as well. And that is basically my flying career. Obviously, lots of stories of little things that happened in between, but we will carry on till tomorrow morning if we have to mention all of those. So that's basically my 50 years of enjoying myself flying airplanes. Thank you, Vossie.
50 years, I think you rolled that 50 years into about an hour and 20 minutes. Good golly gosh. There's so many. You mentioned that you could carry on with the academy, you could carry on with Crayfish at Langebaan, and you could Stoutgat springs to mind, yeah, Stoutgat. So the SAAF have a reputation for being not shy. So I think I'm going to suggest you come back and tell us just Stoutgat stories. And if you want to drag one or two of your Stoutgat buddies in, then that'll be terrific. Martin, I've mentioned this book. Any other writing on the horizon, or are you going to do us your life story? Are you going to involve more of your experiences in black and white, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I've actually started writing. Basically just what I told you now, but in obviously a more detail. I've written the Russian episode I've completed, so that's done. But yeah, writing a book is not easy, and takes a lot of time. And you know, I've often wondered who's actually going to read this. It will be nice for my family and maybe a few friends, but yeah, I may still complete it. And then I really want to write a book about Three Squadron's history, all the way from the Second World War right through the Bush War as well, until it closed down in 94. So I'd really like to do that. But my good friend, Dr. Stefan Bauer, who wrote that first book with me, he's written quite a few. He's quite expert at it. So I'll have to go and sit with him, and he'll have to motivate me to and show me the way to do it, because it's been quite a while since since we did the first book. But yeah, it's not easy, but yes, I'll still do it. Then also I've got a lot of photographs and videos, which I will share with you as well, so that you can add to the program as discussed. But yeah, when I do my life, I'd like to do it maybe in two ways. One, a pictorial version of it, and then also the other one, more a written version of it, because I've got, unfortunately, I have all the information. The one bit of a problem that I have is with Three Squadrons specifically, the operational diaries, the war diaries of Three Squadron from the Bush War times is missing. Like a lot of other squadron war diaries are also missing. Nobody knows where they are. So that is a problem, because now you'll have to rely on your friends, and it's been quite a while, so the memory's not that sharp anymore, and the war diaries would have helped a lot.
I did my apprenticeship at Langebaanweg. Loved the base too, as you say. It was close to Cape Town, so you could do all sorts of things. Learned so much at Langebaanweg. So yeah, as you were speaking, and then you mentioned Commandant Vossie Vorster. He was my OC at 6th Squadron. So the potential of his stories coming out, that'll be great. Apparently he's written a book. I must still get hold of it.
You must definitely read it. It's absolutely hilarious. It's one of the funniest books that I've read, and especially if you come out of the Air Force, you understand the nuances behind it. It's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. He was my instructor on Impalas for a little while on Vossie Vorster, so he's a good friend.
Yeah, that squadron had a totally different meaning to it while he was OC. The memories, when you sit and you speak like this, the memories that come back. That's why you've got to write. You've got to share some of these photos. I don't want, because you're going to come back and talk to us about the Stoutgat days. That you're going to do. I'm going to carry on nagging you until you do so. But we'll give it a month or 7 or so. We won't rush. But for now, yeah. I've just got one more question. I sort of briefed you about this. Something that tickles me pink is you guys, you captain of industry, really. You run a commercial aviation enterprise together with others, obviously, but you're the team leader. You fly a Boeing 737 or 7, whatever you fly, 747 Airbus, whatever you fly, and then you get out and you get back into a Harvard on a weekend. What is the mindset readjustment on that, or is it just natural eventually?
Yeah, look, I didn't mention it. I don't know why, I forgot about it, but I was still lucky enough to fly Mirage F1s up to about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
We, Gabon and Brazzaville, Congo bought some of our old Mirage F1s, and they had nobody to fly it for them, so we went there and flew it for them. So at one stage, I was flying Mirage F1, Boeing 737, and all of it. What else? All at at the same time. But these aircraft are so diverse that it's actually not a problem, because flying a Boeing is totally different to flying a Mirage F1, totally different to flying a Harvard. I think I'm not somebody who likes to fly a lot of different types at the same time. I'm uncomfortable with that. So if you get aircraft where the types are very close together, you're actually more likely to make an error. What we had a lot in Comair is flew a lot of 737s, but different models. And then you'd find things are just slightly different places in the cockpit. And that was actually more disconcerting than climbing from a Boeing 737 into an F1, because it's so totally different that you don't actually get, if you want to call it, plainly mixed up between the two.
Yeah.
And then Harvard, totally different from that again. So yeah, but it's the fortunate thing is, if you did it for a long time and you've got lots of experience on those aircraft, then it's actually quite easy, because it's like, I don't want to sound flippant, but it's like riding a bicycle. You strap yourself in that cockpit and everything just comes back to you, and the motor skills are there, and it just happens. I mean, I had a gap of 14 years between when I last flew the F1 in Mirage F1 in the Air Force, and when I flew it in Gabon again for first year, just training before we went to Gabon, and it wasn't a problem. So because I'd flown it for so long, it wasn't a problem. In actual fact, another thing, I've got the most Mirage F1 hours of any pilot in our Air Force.
Some achievement. It's all of it. I mean, 50 years of aviation. It's good.
Yeah, I'm privileged.
Yeah.
Very privileged.
It is absolutely stupendous.
What we find now at the museum is the young guys who never had anything to do with the Harvard, they actually, they're quite fearful of the old Harvard. If you look at this aircraft now with the tail wheel as well, and everything that goes with tail draggers and so on, and it's a big beast. It's a big heavy beast. It looks a bit intimidating, but we were young 17-year-olds straight out of school. That was it. You either flew this thing or you didn't make it. You got kicked out. So
yeah,
there wasn't anything else. So it wasn't. It was intimidating and everything, but that's the way it was. So now for other guys who never had anything to do with this aircraft, it seems like quite a beast. But for us, we didn't know better. That was what flying was all about.
Yeah. If you couldn't solo, you went home. So
that's right. Yeah. So you got on with it, and everybody was in the same boat. And yeah, we were young 17-year-olds, fearless. We just got on with the job. Oh, fantastic instructors, of course. They helped you through it. They taught you how to fly this beast, and yeah, that's what we did.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. There's I can also start popping in more questions, but I won't. I'm cognizant of the fact that you've, at very short notice, as I said earlier on, agreed to do this chat. So I'm going to say thank you so much. It's such a pleasure for me to be on. It's an honor too. And I keep shaking my head. 50 years of it. Good golly gosh. You are blessed indeed.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for doing these programs. I think it's very worthwhile and needs to be done. So thanks a lot for doing this. It's my pleasure taking part. Thank you.
Thank you. Extremely thanks a lot. And yes, I think that was Koos's original vision. We have to capture the legacy before it's gone, before the history disappears. I do say thank you very, very much. I look forward to further communication and but possibly more chats in the future. But for now, thank you, and until we meet again, until we chat again, folk, you feel welcome to come and share your stories. I will run the email address down the bottom here, but for now, as we always say here, until we chat again, God bless.
Cheers.